Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a world that's almost completely hidden from the rest of us, the unseen, everyday reality of citizens in North Korea. We're going to step directly into what it actually means to live under absolute, state-mandated control, and we're starting with a truly harrowing personal reality.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To really grasp this level of control, you've got to hear the story of Shin Dong-hyuk. Shin wasn't just sent to a political prison. He was literally born inside North Korea's Camp 14. He grew up experiencing such severe starvation and deprivation that at just 13 years old, he overheard his own mother and brother planning to escape, and he reported them to the guards. Why? Well, he was just hoping to be rewarded with a little extra food. Instead, 7 months later, he was forced to stand at the front of a crowd and watch their execution.
Now you might be wondering, how on earth does a kid get born in a prison camp to begin with? Understanding the law of guilt by association is absolutely crucial here. Under this specific North Korean policy, political crimes aren't just punished individually. If a single relative decides to flee to South Korea, the state decides their entire bloodline is tainted. Because of that, up to 3 generations of that person's family, we're talking grandparents, parents, and children, can be systematically rounded up and sent to forced labor camps.
Section 1. A Country in the Dark. The Historical Shift. To comprehend how a society reaches this extreme state of existence, we need to zoom out a bit from the individual level and look at how North Korea actually got here.
It's a pretty stark historical shift. After the Korean Peninsula was divided in 1945, the North actually saw some significant growth. By 1980, North Korea's per capita GDP actually exceeded that of India and China. They had free healthcare, education, housing, the whole shebang. But this was heavily subsidized by the Soviet Union. So when the USSR collapsed in 1991, all that vital aid just vanished overnight. Without it, their economy completely crashed, which triggered a catastrophic man-made famine between 1995 and 1998. That famine tragically resulted in the starvation of up to 2 million people. The contrast here is just absolutely staggering. We're talking about a country that went from experiencing a 4.5% annual GDP growth in the 1980s to the reality we see today. If you look at modern satellite imagery of the Korean Peninsula at night, South Korea and China are glittering with lights, and right in the middle sits North Korea, a literal black void. It's completely in the dark, and citizens are accustomed to going to sleep by 7 p.m. simply because there is no electricity.
Section 2. The Anatomy of Control. Everyday friction. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how this totalitarian ideology doesn't just stop at borders or big economic policies. It trickles all the way down to dictate the most minute, everyday personal choices.
15. In North Korea, there are exactly 15 approved hairstyles for men and 15 approved hairstyles for women. You cannot simply walk into a barber and ask for whatever you want. It doesn't work that way. And interestingly enough, the specific haircut worn by Supreme Leader Kim Jong Un is completely absent from this list. It is exclusively reserved for him, and absolutely no citizen is permitted to copy it.
And they actually enforce this wardrobe conformity through a literal fashion police patrolling the streets. They're constantly on the lookout for any signs of Western cultural influence. So, if you're caught wearing blue jeans, ripped denim, branded clothing, or if a woman is wearing red lipstick or a sun hat, your clothes might literally be cut right there in the street. You could be fined or even jailed. Everything has to align perfectly with state socialist propaganda.
This suffocation extends right into technology too. The global internet as we know it, it simply doesn't exist for the public. Instead, they have a heavily censored state intranet. Just to use it, a citizen has to formally request government permission. Then, they have to sit right next to a librarian who acts as a monitor. Every 5 minutes, the screen freezes, and that librarian must physically scan their fingerprint just to let you continue. On top of that, the limited smartphones that are available take random screenshots at unpredictable times and send them straight to the government to monitor your activity.
Section 3. The Architecture of Fear. Designing Distrust. These physical and technological constraints are immense, for sure, but they are only part of the equation. Let's look at how these are backed up by intense psychological controls engineered by the state police.
And this brilliantly illustrates the foundation of that fear, the Songbung system. Documented by the UN, this is essentially a rigid social caste structure based purely on perceived political loyalty. So the core loyalists get the best housing in Pyongyang and all the resources. The wavering class is constantly suspected and heavily monitored. Meanwhile, the hostile class, who are deemed enemies of the state, are banned from coming anywhere within 50 kilometers of the capital and are frequently forced into hard labor. This system dictates your job, your food rations, and even who you're allowed to marry.
To maintain this, the secret police have basically engineered a society completely devoid of trust. Neighborhood associations divide city blocks into little groups of 30 to 40 houses. Citizens, especially those in that hostile class we just talked about, are explicitly forced to spy on each other. You literally can't even trust your own family. The source material highlights one instance where a daughter-in-law's report to the authorities sent her own mother-in-law to a political prison for a decade.
This creates such a profound and jarring disconnect. On one hand, you have state media tirelessly broadcasting this propaganda, portraying Kim Jong Un as a godlike savior, with citizens weeping just being in his presence. But on the other hand, the grim reality is that between 80,000 and 120,000 political prisoners are currently locked away in camps. They're subjected to 16 to 18 hours of forced labor a day and starved to the point where they're eating rats, snakes, and grass just to survive.
The severity of these camps is absolute. A former guard named Myung Chol actually stated that in the event of a war or revolution, guards have strict orders to execute every single prisoner, just to erase all evidence of the camp's existence. Based purely on these findings, the United Nations has impartially stated that these extreme crimes against humanity are unparalleled in the modern world, comparing the actions directly to those of Nazi Germany.
Section 4. Cracks in the System. The Silent Revolution. Because here's the thing. Despite this overwhelming architecture of fear, absolute control is incredibly difficult to maintain forever. Below the surface, a quiet, grassroots resistance is actually brewing.
Economically, the whole country is shifting. See, men are largely trapped in mandatory government jobs. Their state salaries just haven't adjusted to reality, paying the equivalent of only 7 to 9 kilograms of corn per month. Since the men are tied up in the state system, women have stepped up and taken charge out of pure necessity. Today, a staggering 70% of household income is actually generated by women operating in underground black markets.
These markets are known as the Jangmadong. They were actually born out of those horrific famines in the 1990s, when the state food distribution completely failed. What started as desperate survival trading has evolved into something much bigger. Today, citizens use the Jangmadong to trade food, medicines, and highly illegal foreign media. The government actually tried to shut these markets down and seize private wealth back in 2009. But the public pushback was so unified and forceful that the regime literally had to back down and apologize.
Ultimately, there are three main forces quietly fracturing the state's grip right now. First, those black markets are providing financial independence outside of state control. Second, foreign media smuggled into the country is completely shattering the state's propaganda. And third, widespread bribery. Citizens are figuring out that the strict dictatorial rules don't matter quite as much if authorities can simply be bought off. Breaking rules together is, ironically enough, building trust back into these neighborhoods.
All of this is building into a massive information crisis for the regime. Of the North Korean defectors who managed to escape and had access to USB drives, an incredible 98% of them were carrying illegal media. We're talking specifically about things like South Korean dramas. People are risking 12 years of hard labor just to watch a foreign TV show, which really proves that information from the outside world is successfully piercing that propaganda bubble.
Which leads us to this final thought. When you look at the lengths the state will go to, dictating haircuts, monitoring internet minutes, punishing grandchildren for a grandfather's crime, it reveals not just immense cruelty, but immense insecurity. So how fragile is absolute power when a single smuggled USB drive containing a television show can shatter a lifetime of carefully crafted state propaganda? It definitely leaves us reflecting on the profound value of our own individual freedoms and the incredible, enduring resilience of the human spirit. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning and stay curious.